Pastor's Heart and Dominic Steele, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. Today we're talking about adaptive leadership, and Brian Tung is the Senior Minister of St Georges Anglican Church in Hurstville. He's done a doctorate in this whole area. But before we come to Brian though, can I ask you to help us out with the Pastor's Heart? We're asking you to become a financial partner. We need to pay the small crew that work on this program. We want to grow, but before we do that, we need to become financially self-sufficient. If you are able to go to patreon.com/the Pastor's Heart and to help us out, I don't know, $5, $10 a month, something like that, then that would be terrific. It'd also be great if you could like us on Facebook and share us, make a comment. In fact, we're live this afternoon, and so if you've got a question to ask Brian, you can put it in the Facebook comments on this thread, and I will put them to him. Brian Tung, thanks very much for coming in. We're not to shake hands, so we forget these things. Whoops.
It's good to see you.
It's good to see you. Yes, it's great to have you. Let's start with the Pastor's Heart, and what's God been doing on your heart in this season?
Yeah, I think a lot of revelation or exposing. 6 weeks ago, things happened very, very suddenly, and I was doing a lot of reflection. I was responding to a lot of things, feeling a lot of emotions, and I think what God has done is expose a lot of the false things that I've been building and relied on, my idols, as it were, and it became very, very clear to me. And as the Lord has taken me apart, slowly putting me back together, redirecting my gaze once again to Jesus, and hopefully to let go of things that are unworthy. I think that's what God's been doing to me.
Now, Brian, last week on the Pastor's Heart, we had Adam Lowe from Toowoomba on, and he gave us a whole series of scenarios, different directions we could be heading going forward. One of them was the possibility of a church just snapping back to the way it was.
Yeah.
But another, and we've got that diagram, we'll pop that up there. But the other one that I particularly was interested in was the one of reframing the direction, going to a different direction, learning some lessons, recognising that we've started some things that we liked, we've stopped doing some things that we don't want to go again. And you made the comment to me afterwards that actually it's going to be quite complex to lead the church to a different place, and harder, in fact, than the leadership we've had to, more difficult than the leadership we've just had to exercise this last little while.
So, yeah.
Tell me about that, yeah.
Okay, so as I was mentioning to you before we started, there's a difference between responding to something that's happened and leading out of the thing that has happened. So, and so far, I think most of us in Christian leadership has been responding to the situation that we've been given.
We've got a problem. We've had to work out, well, what's our response to that? Yeah, okay. Yeah. Then there's working out what to do, and then there's how to get there.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the pressure as we're heading out of the problem or disruption is to snap back, because we're so used to problem solving. So if we were doing virtual church, how do we do virtual church better beyond all this? Whereas I think the task ahead of us is fundamentally different. So let me give you an example. Assuming I'm driving my car here, I can, and I hear a rattle in the car, and the car stopped. I need to do something to fix it. So a problem has arisen, and I need to respond to it. Which is all very necessary. Keep fixing my car, however, doesn't tell me whether the direction that I'm heading is the right one. And I think that's actually the challenge ahead of us at the moment, is to work out whether the direction that we're heading in the long term is the reframing of the problem. Okay. Yeah, that's what I think.
So, having worked out or begun to work out where you think you ought to take the church, and I guess lots of us at the moment are thinking through those questions. We're thinking through, well, I'm going to have to lead this church for a long time on online mode, or we're going to be able to get back together fairly in the next 2 months, or we're going to get back together but it's going to be a very big rejig to get in order to get back together. But either way, I mean, whether you're leading the people online for a long time, you're going to be looking around, your church is still going to be online, other churches are going to be back live. It's going to be complex to lead people in that season. It's going to require level 5 leadership skills that a lot of us actually, we've kind of believed in, but we haven't been necessarily using. Do you want to?
Yeah. Maybe I can comment a little bit on that. The leading out of what's needed. I'm going to go back one step. Part of my response to the task that we had is, I think we've got a great opportunity to make significant changes. The capacity, however, to make the changes is limited. We can't do everything, right? So we have to choose what we do in going ahead. One of my concerns is if we keep...
and you're talking about making real change in the church.
That's right.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
The difference between what some authors have called technical changes and adaptive changes, the difference between the two. The technical changes are, I think there's a problem with the car and I'm going to fix it. So keep fixing problem. So into it, we keep saying this is, but whereas the adaptive change is actually the discerning the direction. By definition, going in a direction is not a problem unless you haven't got to where you want to. And so it's actually finding the direction when there's no problem. And part of what I think we need to do is to leverage what we have been given, this opportunity, and partly setting aside intentional time and energy to actually invest in finding the direction. Okay. Now, I want to go back a little bit about change, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Disruption creates disequilibrium.
Yes, now what does that word mean, disequilibrium?
Out of kilter, off center, we're traveling along okay, we can manage this and that, and disequilibrium means uncomfortable, out of your comfort zone.
So all of our churches are going through that at the moment.
Absolutely. And you need this equilibrium in order to make change. Okay? And when there's an disequilibrium that happens, you want to go back to equilibrium, what you're comfortable with. And this is why the temptation is to actually snap back. We are uncomfortable, we want to go back to what we were. Okay? But whereas disequilibrium is actually necessary to keep pushing ahead to make necessary changes.
So sometimes we would actually, as pastors, go through the intentional process of creating that disruption or disequilibrium, but we don't actually have to do that at the moment because it's already been done for us.
Yeah. And the irony is, when we fix our eyes on technical solutions, we're actually taking people back to the comfort zone, which won't allow them to be motivated to make the necessary changes.
So you're saying don't waste this moment of leadership.
Yep, absolutely.
And we're going to be tempted to waste this moment of leadership just because we're so overwhelmed, if for no other reason.
Yep. People are stressed, they're uncertain, and we want to give them comfort. That's what good leadership wants to do, right? And ironically, the more we want to do that, the less likely we will make the changes that are needed for the long term to deal with the new situation that we may find ourselves in.
So I think then you're suggesting that most pastors have ahead of them, or have had ahead of them, a number of big changes that they really would have liked to have introduced into this church, that they've not been able to, that have kind of been staring them in the face, and now might be the moment to grasp that nettle.
Absolutely. And they're the fundamental, really, really hard issues that in the past, when you try to bring about those changes, you're just hitting a brick wall again and again and again, and there's just no way around it because there's no clear solution. So what the Lord has done in His providence is to generate a situation where throw everyone out of kilter, and there's a chance to actually keep, as it were, riding on that discomfort to actually press ahead to make the type of changes that might be good for the church and for our ministry as well too.
As you've spoken to some of your peers or watched some of our peers, what are some of those kind of big changes that you can see that, Church X, if they just if the leader X grasped the nettle, then he'd be able to,
Yeah, so one example that comes to mind is pastoral care and discipleship, particularly for churches that are not doing streaming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so either they don't have the capacity or they deliberately decided that maybe in the past we've been encouraging a passive consumeristic culture in the church. Mm-hmm. And they may think, okay, if we stream church, people will just continue that. So what we're going to do is we're going to stop that, and we're going to make the people in the pew, as it were, do the hard work of discipleship, leading and whatever. It's a very, very hard decision because
that sounds risky. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. But maybe they couldn't have done that before, and now that they're able to. The thing about disequilibrium...
So they're using the heat of the disequilibration, I'm really struggling on that word, to bring about the long-awaited change that they wanted to,
Absolutely. I want to make an incidental point as well too, and I'm going to throw a phrase. A lot of people say, or current wisdom is that people are fearful of change. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's more accurate to say that people are not afraid of change, but they're afraid of loss. Mm-hmm. Okay? So change, if it gives you what you want that. Mm-hmm. So people aren't afraid of that. What they are afraid of is to lose the things that they think are important to them. Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe they're wedded to a way of doing evangelism. Mm-hmm. Okay, they've got a certain role. They know exactly what they do, but maybe in a new environment, they can no longer run evangelism ministry like the way that they have. That's a loss. Okay, so this equilibrium that we have now, part of the point is it has to be sustained. Mm-hmm. And this is the thing. So don't go too quickly back to comfort and bring things back to disequilibrium. The only way to actually bring about long-term cultural, structural, systemic change is to sustain that level of discomfort where people will keep going with the change. If the discomfort level is too high, people will give up. If it's too low, people won't be motivated. So I think in God's providence at the moment, we've got this moment of heat. Mm-hmm. And we have to keep the heat on. Mm-hmm. And I think that heat needs to be maintained for at least 12 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So when we think change, is not just, we'll make a change when step 2 or step 3 comes in, is making that change and keep at that change for the next 12 months in order for it to stick. I don't think we realise that it's actually longer term.
So you're talking much bigger systemic change in the Christian life. I mean, as you were talking, let me give you an example that I was reflecting on. Parents intentionally discipling their children rather than outsourcing it to the kids' church leaders.
Absolutely.
Now, I can see that if this goes on and your family was to survive as a Christian, then parents would have to be intentionally discipling their children, and we would have brought about a phenomenal cultural change that's very different to a technical change.
That's right.
Yeah.
So technical change is, how do we work out how to give parents information or resources to do this? The adaptive change is to leverage the opportunity to make that fundamental change in where's the center of discipleship for the next generation. Is it going to be professional in a church building?
Kids church leader,
Yep. Or is it going to be in the home? Mm-hmm. That's the big. And part of the things that I said before is we can't cope with too many changes, and so we need to see the change that is ready to be made, right? That would actually pay long-term kingdom and gospel dividend. Seize that change and persevere with it for the next 12 months. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, what are you thinking about doing?
Yeah.
I mean, just in case anyone from St Georges is watching.
Look, we're really keen to encourage peer-to-peer discipleship of more of that happening, whether it's member to member. By discipleship, I mean evangelism as well. Mm-hmm. But that P2P is also within the family as well too. So decentralizing some of the work that we're actually doing. And so far, and it's an ironic thing, the more as a church leader and in church ministry we do things well, the less motivation people in the church need to do that.
To own it themselves. Yeah.
That's right. Okay. So we got aspirations about we want to equip people, but fundamentally there's no reason for people to, because we're doing all the work, for them,
Providing
really.
it. Yeah.
Now we have no choice. We can provide content, whether in children ministry or discipleship, whether people actually take that up and apply that in their context, we can't control. But now is the time where we can actually put the accelerator on a little bit and go, this is what's going to happen. And it may happen for the next 12 months. So either you just go into hibernation as a Christian, and either your kids don't get discipled for the next 12 months, or
you own it.
And we will help you to do this as best as we can. Yeah. So that's the priority for us at the moment.
Now, you're in a church. You're in a large church, and I'm looking at you from a distance, but I can't see that things are going to be simple for you when you get to stage 3. Do you know?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
How are you thinking about you leading through that stage? Yeah.
So I think we're talking about the things that many other churches are doing. Do we go online? Do we do cell church type model? Do we do a hybrid? Do we plant churches and whatnot? I think the two things that we're thinking of, whatever we adopt in the next, for the rest of this year, has to be sustainable beyond that.
So you're thinking, what's the long-term culture change I want to have as a church?
And they're setting up the structure that will allow for that. So, for example, we could plant, so we're a church of 500, 600 people. This means, and we've got 3 time slots with multiple congregation meeting at the same time. In order to actually meet the step 3 100 people limit, we have to basically plant 3 new congregations.
Yep.
Okay. Now, I'm not convinced that we have the people resources to actually do that. So we might be able to sustain that in the long term, but beyond that...
In the short term.
In the short term. In the long term, I'm not sure that we can actually do it. However, the cell church model might be something that's actually sustainable. Okay? The thing about adaptive change and adaptive leadership is the posture is one of experimentation and learning. Okay? So in an environment where there are no clear answers and no one really has the answer, you have to pilot testings, have feedback, and keep pushing it. So one of the things that, in fact, we're talking about it at staff, what we're going to do in step 2 is to pilot test in a smaller scale some of the cell church model. So not wholesale, but in step 2, when we pilot test it, it gives us data to know which direction we might be heading in step 3. But in step 3, when it all comes, there's going to be a lot of experimentation and piloting as well too. So I believe when we're leading in a new phase in the next 12 months, whether in evangelism, in children ministry, or in discipleship, I want to encourage my fellow Christian leaders to maybe take some risk, try things, prepare to accept that whatever you're testing may be completely wrong, but that's okay. And just keep learning from the experience as well as from one another in all this. Small risks smartly with experimentation. That's really right. What you're talking about there, that's right. Isn't it? Yeah. So not a priori ideological and go, I want to put all my eggs into this one basket. Or I'm going to keep doing whatever. It's small, incremental, testing so that you can learn from it. So for the purpose of learning, so that you can take it, scale it up to the next step.
Where are the pressures that you find to snap back?
Firstly, internal. Okay, because I know what has worked. It's far easier for us to just go back to how we've done things. Okay, in evangelism, discipleship, children ministry, and there's pressure on from the congregation as well too. They are dislocated. They're in this disequilibrium. They're really feeling the loss, right? What they think the future is to go back to what was comfortable. So I'm getting questions now from church members and say, when are we going back to church? By that they mean my time slot, doing exactly what we've done in the past. And I want to do what's helpful for them. And if they're telling me this is what's helpful, the pressure is to do that.
To give them what they want.
Exactly. And if I hold back and go, no, we're going to move this congregation to here, and you may never come back to church for the next 12 months, or may not. You need to, as a cell leader, to take more responsibility. So instead of preparing 3 hours a week, you're going to increase that to 5 to 10 hours a week. By the way, you may have kids with you in your home that you might take the primary responsibility of actually discipling instead of Sunday school. And their response is, I don't like that. Why can't we go back to, you know, how we had Sunday school ministry and youth ministry and whatever. So lots of pressure at this point in time. But I think in 5 months' time, the pressure will be greater.
Greater?
I think so. Particularly because if there's experimentation.
Right.
And we can't deliver the outcome that people think they're getting. So they will put more pressure on and say, this isn't working, let's go back to what we have. Whereas the cultural change requires a length period of time, learning, yes, but perseverance as well too.
Do you worry about the money?
Is not my primary concern at this point in time, for good reason or for bad reason. Thankfully,
I mean, that sounds like quite a. I mean, I know you're talking pilot program, but if you rolled that out, you're becoming you and the staff are much more distant from the membership, and therefore, will they see the need to give to the central thing, or because they won't actually realise that the leaders are properly, the intensive work's going in amongst the leaders and all that kind of thing. They won't see where the time is being spent, and so will that be financially viable?
I'm not
sure.
Let
alone, there's a mission goal, and is it a financially viable goal?
Yeah. Look, our people have been really, really good. I believe that to the extent that we can, if we take the congregation with us on this journey, and we could demonstrate not just why we do things, but the value we add to the kingdom work, that there may be more traction in terms of finances.
Tell me about take the congregation with you on the journey, because whether or not somebody was going to go in the direction that you're going, or whether or not they're going in the direction of, well, we're going to have 2 morning congregations instead of 1, or whatever, there's a very complex issue of taking people with you at the moment. What have you got there?
Yeah, look, I don't think we're doing anything different to anybody else. We try to be clear with our communication. We set about explaining the parameters and the conditions that we're operating in, and talking in very public space. But we say to people, look, this is what the constraints are, and given the constraints, here are the options that we have. Here are the reasons why I prefer this over this. This is a conversation that we can have, and I would be very open to say we are testing it in this way. If it falls to a heap and we can't actually gain the type of cultural gospel change that we're hoping for, I'm happy to actually abandon it. So being open to that. We don't have a town hall meeting and get consensus in that way, but we do work hard, particularly through our small group system, to explain the issues and the decisions that we're making. And hopefully a critical mass of people will understand and willing to put in their lot with us and go, we'll journey through this. Yeah, that's, again, is all learning. So if other people have a better way to do this, I'm very, very open to hearing them.
You had a line earlier about people don't hate change, they hate loss. Can you give me a couple of examples, perhaps from your past ministry experience or even the right now situation, about how you're interacting with people who are feeling like they're losing something, and how you are helping to lead them through it?
Okay, yeah, thank you for raising that. And part of that line is to remind Christian leaders that over the next 12 months, if we're serious about bringing this fundamental adaptive change, people will feel lost, and we need to allocate intentional time and energy. So hypothetically, we are to move one of the congregations from Sunday to a weekday to create more space on a Sunday possibility. Now, it sounds very clinical. Look, for gospel reasons and given constraints, that's what we have to do. Okay. Now, people might be willing to accept that, but they'll feel the loss. Okay, they're in pain. Being in pain, there's the emotional side. It means that I need to spend more time just checking up on how people are going. And being in pain means that sometimes people might be angry, and they might take their anger out on me, on the church. And I need to remember that I must not take that personally, okay? And to keep loving people and hearing people out.
And one of the things I think you were saying to me during the week is that at one level, everyone's going to be unhappy because everyone's going to lose something.
That's right.
And that's the reality of. I just got to get used to that idea. Everyone's going to lose something. Get used to it, Dominic.
And the other thing is, as we go through loss and as we use our emotional energy to deal with that loss, both within ourselves and around us, we're not as productive as we've been when we're comfortable. Okay, so maybe in the past we've been active in evangelism and discipleship, and suddenly for the next 12 months, so this period, for example, I'm hearing anecdotally that the group that's really suffering are the 38 to 50-year-olds. You know, they're really struggling with productivity in terms of Christian ministry. Now, it's not you, it's anecdotal. Okay, and I suspect if they're like me and my household, suddenly the kids are at home. We're doing schoolwork with them. I'm processing changes within myself. My wife is doing the same thing. We just don't have spare energy to have another fight to get the kids to adopt another change in terms of children ministry and that, whatever. And I think things like that is going to last for the next 12 months. We're just using our energies, just coping with change or whatever. And I think that we'll find our people in the pews generally will be lethargic, not as active. This is why I'm suggesting that we pick the change that we want to make, right? So that we still, we're leveraging the momentum created by this, but not overwhelming our people with too many things that they have to cope with. Okay.
Now, you've said 12 months a couple of times. Is that because you're kind of thinking stage 3 is going to go for 12 months? Or is that because you recognise we need to do a 12-month thing for actually the adaptive change to become embedded?
Yeah, the latter.
Right.
Yeah. But it just happens to fit into the step 3, possibly 12 months. Okay. I think 12 months is probably the length of time needed to bring about the type of adaptive change. What adaptive change looks like, it won't look like this. As in, you bring about a change, you keep at it, and what will happen is you go up, and it falls. And then you intervene again, and it goes up again. And so it looks like that. So for the next 12 months, that's what ministry may actually look like so in our example, we want more peer-to-peer discipleship. So initially it might get started, people are enthusiastic, and then they go, wow, this is really hard, and I have no spare energy, and then it drops off. We got to relaunch it. We got to provide more support or whatever. It might pick back up a little bit, and then something else happens and it goes down, and so I reckon 12 months as we journey through it that way. Hopefully, God willing, we get to a point where a critical mass, so maybe, and not 100%, 60 or 70% of the church have made that move forward, and it becomes kind of the culture of what we do. So this is what we do around here. we look out for people. You know, it's not just a minister's job to disciple people. It's not just a small group leader's job. It's my job. It's not. I don't have to disciple everyone. I just need to disciple one person. And if you join our church, that's what we do.
Give me some other. As you look around at other churches, and you think, oh, it'd be great if that church adopted that adaptive change, or this church adopted that adaptive change. Yeah.
Look, I don't want to presume on. Another example, possibly, that comes to mind is how quickly we adopt online giving. Okay, people. So talking about finances, it surprised me a little bit because going into for a long time we've been talking about online giving, and the rhetoric has always been, nah, people won't do that. You know, especially older people. But what we've experienced is our people have been so wonderful and supportive of gospel ministry that they were willing to experience the difficulty and going online. Now, is that going to keep so giving patterns? You might say that's a whatever, is a minor change.
But it's been quite a fundamental cultural issue in your church, yeah.
That's right. Now, it's not a cultural issue yet.
Right.
Because it's only happened as a reaction to the disruption.
Right, yeah.
In order for it to become a culture, we have to keep at it.
Yeah.
You know? So, okay, so people meet face-to-face again. Do they still have to give online? Do you mean? It takes 12 months.
Right.
And deliberate intention. Now, I wouldn't say that that's a huge priority for us. Maybe for some churches, they go, this is the one that the church is ready to make, and it will make a big difference to us at this point in time. Then what I would encourage is, okay, then work on it. What's the plan over the next 12 months to make that part of membership? Okay. Now, I don't know the answer to that, but you can imagine the clever people out there will go, okay, you know, we can do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or whatever it is.
Brian, thanks very much for coming in. It's been very stimulating, this discussion.
It's a pleasure.
My guest on The Pastor's Heart, Brian Tung, and Brian, of course, is the Senior Minister of St Georges Hurstville and an expert in this area of leadership and the Christian church. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week on The Pastor's Heart.